I have a confession to make. I like watching and reading reviews that trash movies. When a critic picks apart a movie and talks about everything he or she hated about it and everything that went wrong, I find it really entertaining. I love to watch the top 10 worst movies of the year videos, and I never watch the top 10 best movies of the year videos. I mean, who wants to see a half an hour or more of someone sucking up to Hollywood? Now, since I'm a filmmaker, this seems kind of counterintuitive. You would think that I would only want to watch reviews that are positive because that would offer me inspiration. It's actually just the opposite. When I watch reviews, especially of Hollywood movies that do nothing but praise a movie and fawns all over a particular filmmaker, I find it extremely boring. It actually really irritates me as a filmmaker. And I don't feel that I learn anything from a review that says, in essence, "Oh, you did everything right, and I love you, and there's no way you can improve." Boring. Furthermore, I feel there are many movies that are overrated that receive way too much praise. There have been several times when I saw a movie and thought it wasn't all that, and then I went and looked at reviews to confirm that the movie had problems, and I'm often surprised to find that the majority, if not all of the reviews, praised this movie that I thought had a lot of problems and really could have been made better, or not made at all for that matter. An example of this is the most recent John Wick movie, John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. I liked the first John Wick movie and thought it was a great action thriller that kept you on the edge of your seat. But the second two John Wick movies, especially the third installment, I thought was really slow moving and boring. But apparently I'm the only one who felt this way. And I love Halle Berry, who was in the third John Wick movie, but her role I thought was irrelevant, and there was really no reason for her to be in the movie since basically what she had was an extended, glorified cameo. And there were a couple of implausible things that happened, such as there's a scene where a bad guy shoots one of Halle Berry's attack dogs, and the next scene the dog is up and running and biting people like nothing ever happened. It's like, what? None of the reviews pointed out this glaring inconsistency. In fact, the reviews praised John Wick 3 to the high heavens, and even my filmmaker friends and family said they loved it and it was one of their favorite movies of the year last year. So even though I enjoy watching and reading bad reviews, one thing I don't enjoy is when reviewers pick apart an independent movie that was obviously made with very little resources and they totally trash the movie. In comedy, there's a term called punching down. This means that as a comedian, you should only punch up and mainly stick to making fun of people who have more power than the average person, because obviously making fun of people who are powerless, like minorities and disabled people, is not only politically incorrect, it can be downright cruel. But there are many YouTube channels whose reviews I otherwise enjoy who have this practice of taking obscure, independent movies and ridiculing them. And quite frankly, I don't really see the purpose. As a filmmaker, every year I make a list of movies to study, and I try to assemble a really diverse list that includes classic movies like Citizen Kane, movies by women directors, movies by African Americans and Latinx directors, movies with LGBT themes, and themes about people with disabilities. I started this annual tradition one year when I decided to see every movie listed in a book that I have that was published by Entertainment Weekly, and it lists the 100 greatest movies of all time. I quickly realized, of course, that trying to watch 100 movies in one year, in addition to the movies that I just watched for fun or to go to see with family and friends just to unwind, that's way too much of a daunting task. And I would find myself toward the end of the year, during the holidays, binge watching a lot of the movies that I hadn't gotten to on my list yet. So I cut the list down to 50 movies, which is much more doable. Studying 50 movies in a year basically amounts to watching a movie a week. Now that's very doable because you can watch movies while you're working out or cleaning or multitasking now that we have apps on our smartphones that enable us to watch movies pretty much anytime, anywhere. And I don't try to study every frame and sit glued to the screen when I'm watching a movie that's on my list to study, because that's basically impossible with the pace of modern life, and ain't nobody got time for that in these streets. So I just try to basically get the gist of the movie. And I do feel a sense of accomplishment as I tick down the list and check off movies that I've seen every year. So it occurred to me that this year that maybe I should put a couple of movies on my list that are notoriously bad. My thinking on this was that I could learn about what not to do as a filmmaker by watching bad movies. And I figure after I watch a given bad movie, I could go watch one of the reviews of the movie on my favorite YouTube channels. However, what I found was that a couple of the YouTube channels had reviews, as I mentioned before, of obscure independent movies that were obviously made with very little resources, and the filmmakers either didn't have the time, money, or expertise to make a good movie. Maybe the films were trying to make a trashy horror movie they could cash in on, or some other genre that was just like you could just kind of slap something together. But in some cases, it's a movie that has a good concept but was just poorly executed. So I find that studying movies that are just so blatantly bad, there's really nothing to be learned from that. An analogy is if you're selling vacuum cleaners door to door, there's not much to be learned from another salesperson who is rude to customers, knocks over a priceless vase, spills red wine on a customer's pristine white rug, etc. But there is something to be learned from a colleague who has good people skills and good communication skills, but just can't seem to close the deal. Now, that latter scenario is a more nuanced situation that requires more critical thinking than just ridiculing your coworker who's like a bull in a china shop. Similarly, I do think there is a value in watching a Hollywood movie or even an independent movie that had a relatively high budget where the filmmaker was given adequate resources. Now, let me back up when I say that, because I realize that as a filmmaker, there is never enough money and never enough time. You could always use more money and more resources to expand your vision. Even in $100 million blockbusters, I'm sure the director would say, if we only had more time or more money to do more CGI, we could have made this action sequence even more exciting, or what have you. So what is interesting to me is studying the work of someone who had every advantage at their fingertips, from the best casting directors to the best costume designers to the best set builders, and they still managed to screw it up and make a bad movie. And the reason I find this so intriguing is because as independent filmmakers, we are so often scrambling and making movies under basically what you would call the worst conditions. Many of us are working day jobs, and not only working day jobs, but also working second and third jobs, moonlighting or freelancing to support our art. We're trying to squeeze in filmmaking on the weekends or evenings or whenever we have free time, and we're asking the cast and crew to do the same. So we're making movies in really high pressure conditions where we don't have adequate resources, to say the least. So it's understandable how independent filmmakers end up making movies that are not of high quality because you're working in such bad conditions. And really, truthfully, it's almost a miracle when a micro-budget independent movie actually turns out really well and is able to find an audience and critical acclaim. And that's because of all the obstacles you have to overcome. So this year on my list of greatest movies to study, I included a couple of Hollywood mainstream movies to study that either didn't make a lot of money at the box office or they received a lot of negative critical response. One of the movies I'm studying is Warren Beatty's Town and Country. This is an infamous flop from the early 2000s that starred not only Warren Beatty, but Diane Keaton, Goldie Hawn, and Gary Shandling. Now, with a stellar cast of really experienced, talented people like that, how could you possibly go wrong? So that, I think, is a valuable exercise to see how a movie made within the studio system with a big budget and big stars who have Oscars and Emmy Awards. Now, how could you possibly screw that up? Now, I'm going to do a separate video reviewing Town and Country and talking about everything that went wrong, so I will put a link to that video in the description of this video. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.